Hi, my name is Willow, and today I am going to be reviewing Radio Silence by Alice Oseman, and oh my god, this book is so good. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I sat down to read it, and this book is, if I can figure it out, where is it? Where's the last page? This book is 474 pages in total, at least in my edition, and I sat down to read it one night and I could not put it down. I read it in one sitting. I loved it so much. It was so gripping and so interesting and a narrative that we don't normally see, and I just really loved it. Obviously, I'll go into more detail about that later. I give this book a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I really didn't have many problems with this, and I just enjoyed it so much. Obviously, I finished it in one sitting. There aren't many books that I hate that I finish in one sitting, or that I just find to be quite average. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. And basically, if you're someone who clicked on this video and doesn't know anything about this book, we follow our main character, Frances Janvier, and we follow her through her summer and her final year of her A-levels. So this does take place in the UK, which as a Canadian is really interesting for me to see because I haven't read very many books, and I don't know if this is me just not finding very many of these books, or maybe they're just not published as much here or something, but I haven't read very many books that actually follow UK students through like their GCSEs or their A-levels. So I think that that is really interesting in of itself, and it sort of deals with how this last year is affecting her and her making decisions for uni. She's actually head girl at her school, so it follows that, but of course it's much more than that as well. It follows her newfound friendship with the boy who lives across the street from her. His name is Alid. He's a year older than her, and it has a fandom aspect to it, which I absolutely adore as someone who is very active in fandoms. But Frances is actually really into this podcast on YouTube called Universe City, so it follows her experience with fandom, and I can't give away much more than that because that will spoil the story, but it's very, very interesting, and I love it so much. I highly recommend it. It's one of those books that makes me want to write books, and I absolutely love that. I was blown away by this book. I was so blown away that I looked her up, and I just grabbed my laptop because I have a visual, but I looked her up and I looked into her more, and she's actually an illustrator. She's writing her own webcomic right now that I believe is being bound up into a volume and will be sold, I think. Don't quote me on that. I'm not 100% sure. But she's an illustrator as well, which is awesome, and she has a Redbubble shop. And I needed a sticker for my laptop because I got a scratch on it. And it's not one of those like scratches that you don't notice. It was very big. So I picked up a Radio Silence. Let's zoom in on it because it's really quite pretty. I picked up this Radio Silence sticker, and I tried to do my makeup like after it, but the lipstick's a bit off. I think that my eyes go well with that, but the lipstick's not quite as purple as that or as blue as that. Anyway, I really love this. It covers up my scratch quite nicely, and it's just gorgeous. Like, it's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. The author drew this. Like, this is like legitimate, like official merch. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. So anyway, tangents aside, I'm going to get into the meat of the review and start talking about spoilers. So before I do that, once again, I highly recommend this. Please, please pick it up. It's so good. It's so good. It's so good. I'm gonna stop saying good before it doesn't become a word anymore and get into the spoilery part of this. So the first thing for this review that I want to talk about is the plot. That is what really carries the story along with the characters, which I'll discuss later. But the plot is something that I found really interesting because it's really different from your typical kid in their last year of high school and everything along with that. There's so many other things to it. The fandom element, for example, I loved it. I found it to be, and I found the whole book to be quite relatable really, but I found this bit to be really relatable because I really empathized and sympathized with Frances's obsession with Universe City. And I'm not an artist or anything, but I have contributed my own fan works to fan communities, so I related to her like that, and just the feelings of being in a fandom and having that like little bit, that little obsession that you can come home to and call yours, and just to be in a community like that about something that you adore so much. I think it was really captured very well in this book, though of course it is different because we find out that Aled is the creator and she becomes a part of the canon herself, and I think that was really interesting, addressing canon and stuff in this. I love that. I just really love how fandom was portrayed in this. It was great, even though it's not your typical thing because, as I said, Frances does herself become a part of the canon. But, like I was saying, I just found it to be incredibly relatable and it was great. It was so great. And moving on from that to talk about school. Now, I'm Canadian, as I said earlier in this review, so we don't do GCSEs or A-levels or anything like that here, but I am a bit familiar with the system, so that did help me understand what was going on, because I think if you don't really know what it is, you're gonna be a bit lost, but it is basically like the last year of high school, just a little bit different. Anyway, so as I said earlier in this review, I'm Canadian. We don't do GCSEs or A-levels or anything like that here. We have a pretty similar system to the States with our high schools, but that just made it more interesting to read this book because, as I said, I haven't really read anything about kids doing their A-levels in the UK, and I find it fascinating, first of all, because it's a different system than what I was pushed through, so that's just interesting to read about. I also found it relatable as like a last year of high school kind of thing, even though it was obviously very different. And branching off of that to address a bigger topic, and that is university. Obviously, this was a huge part of this book, and it's not something that's a main aspect of it, really. It's something that's very much in the background, and it comes up occasionally, you know, with like the interviews and doing well in school and, you know, Aled moving to university and stuff like that, and just generally coming to the end of school and thinking about where you want to go after it. So what I liked about the way that university was treated in this was that it was the end goal at first for Frances and, you know, for characters like Daniel, and obviously Aled was already there, but at the end it was flipped for Frances, which I find really interesting because you can see her change throughout the story, and I'll get into this when I talk about her character more, but you can see her change through the story and you can see how her opinions change and how she sort of forms into the person that she wants to be, and how going to uni sort of changes with that. And I really liked that because it doesn't go in the way that it usually would. Like, she doesn't go off to uni like she planned. She makes a different decision, and another thing about that is that there are other characters like Karis and Rain, even learning from Karis as well. I just thought it was really interesting to include that and to have the main character change something that was integral to her. You open the book and she's giving a speech as head girl, and when you end the book, she's in a very different place than she was at the beginning. And obviously that's important for the story and for her character. But I just really loved that it showed that, you know, uni isn't something for everyone. And it did it in a way that I think was realistic and that I think would apply to a lot of other people. And I really loved that about it. And it did add a lot to the plot. I will say that there were some bits, and this is why I took off the 0.5 star, where I had to really suspend my disbelief. Like when Aled's mom really willingly offered up her binder, and just the whole bit about finding Karis in London, and the bit at the train station at the end with Aled's mom and all of them there. It wasn't entirely realistic, but I was willing to suspend my disbelief, and it did add to the story. I think I can't see it going any other way, and I know why the author did it. So while I don't particularly want to suspend my disbelief in contemporary novels, I had to for this, and that was fine. Again, that was my only problem with this, and even at that, it added a lot of action to the story, which I liked. It's not something you normally see, especially that end bit at the train station. It's not something you normally see in contemporary novels, which I did like, but again, suspending my disbelief in contemporary novels isn't always my favorite thing to do, but that was my only problem, like I said. So moving on from that to talk about the characters a bit. So we're gonna start with Frances, of course, our main character. I really liked her. I've talked about how much I relate to her and how interesting her character is. And of course, is a character that really changes from someone who you can see is really a character type that you know, she's head girl, she gets good grades, to the person she's at the end where she's more comfortable with herself and her decisions. And well, I don't think she entirely knows who she is yet, and neither does the reader. It's a very interesting place to leave her in, and I think that makes her a perfectly dynamic character, and I love it. And as I said, I related to her so much. She was just a really fun character to follow too. I loved her voice. She had a very, very distinct voice. And while I think that's easier to achieve in a first-person narrative, I think that that's something that's really important for contemporary stories where the characters hold the story more so than the plot. And I do think that that's true for this as well. The characters really make the story and the plot adds to it. And alongside that, to talk about Alid's character, I really liked Alid too. He was sweet. He was a sweet character, and I really, really felt for him because obviously he's going through so much shit through this that I really, really felt for him. But he was such a solid character, and he was such a good friend, and friendship. I cannot tell you how happy I am to see a friendship in this story be the main relationship, and for it to be between a guy and a girl, and they don't have a weird like, oh my god, I think I have a crush on you moment. It's so good. It's so good. Why is there not more of this? I loved it. I just really loved that bit so much. It's something that we need more of in YA, and their relationship was just so great. I also really liked Daniel and Rain. I think that Rain was a really interesting character because we get from the beginning that Frances isn't really close to her friends. Outside of school, she really prefers to focus on her interests, her being involved in the university fandom, and she just really doesn't feel connected to these people. So I think it's really interesting to see her become better friends with Rain through this, and we could arguably say that Rain is her best friend from that group because she knows her the best, even though they don't really get to know each other until the end of the book, which I think is great. I think it's so great because I think a lot of the time when you're given an introverted main character who prefers to stay in themselves and stay online and stuff like that, they're still given that like best friend who knows them better than anyone else, but that doesn't happen to Frances until she meets Alid. And I think that that's so great to see that. But I did really like Rain. I think that she was such a phenomenal character. She was funny, she was sassy, I thought she was great. My neighbors are drilling now, so that's great. So if you can hear that through the rest of this video, I'm sorry. But anyway, and Daniel, what an interesting character. I went into this really expecting to hate him, but at the end of it, I really liked him because, and this is something that I think is true for all of the characters in this book, is that you kind of assume that they're going to be one way, and especially with the side characters, I think a lot of the times in YA, especially with a lot of the YA books that I've read, I sort of assume that the side characters are going to be a bit more two-dimensional than the main characters that we get. But that's not the case for this book at all, and I love that. All of these characters feel like full characters. They're not flat two-dimensional characters. They all have different sides to them, and we get to see those different sides, and it's so great. And I love that in Daniel, how we can see him be like a stuck-up head boy, but then we can see past that, and we can see his relationship with Alid. And speaking of his relationship with Alid, I love the queer rep in this book. I love how Frances's sexuality is a part of this, but it's not the main central thing. And by the end of it, I don't think she has it figured out, but she sort of has a better idea of herself, and I love that. And I love that we're able to explore queer identities through this, but not have it be a queer story per se. Just, like, it's just a part of it, and I think that that's a really great way to include queer rep and to have queer people in stories, and it was just great. It was so great. It was something that I really didn't expect from it either, but it added just that bit more to the story, and I love it. And while I'm still in characters, I loved Frances's mother. She was really great. I think that she was a great support system for Frances, and she was funny too. She was just a really great character. And oh, speaking of Frances's mother, I was just remembering one bit where Frances mentions that her mom would not really take pride, but sort of like puff her chest out at the fact that, like, oh yeah, this is my kid, and I'm like white, and I'm quoting that wrong, but I found that funny. And speaking of that bit, I love that not everyone in this is white too. I love that Frances is mixed race, and that Rain is brown, and that Daniel is Korean, and I like that those parts of them are still parts of them, but they're not just thrown in there for diversity reasons. They're just people. You know, along the same lines of the queer rep in this story, it's just there. And that's something that I really loved about Alice's writing, I think, because I know in her other stories I've heard that they are quite diverse, and I think that she's just someone who is writing stories about people because they're people, and those people happen to be there, but their stories and what she's telling about them is what matters more than throwing someone in there for diversity's sake. And I love that. I think that that's so important, and that's part of why this book is one of those books that just makes me want to write books and all of that stuff. So I could natter on more about this book because I loved it so much and there was so much that I loved about it, but I'm going to end it here before this video gets way too long. But basically, I adored this book so much. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. I highly recommend it. It was just a fun time. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you would like to, you can subscribe to my channel over here. You can watch some of my other videos over here. If you've read this book, please let me know down in the comments. I would love to chat about it. But otherwise, I hope that you're having a great day, and I will see you soon in my next video. Bye. Much issue with it, and okay, that's lovely. Scared the actual shit out of me. I don't even know where that came from.